You know what your real problem is, Mom? Keep a man happy. Table. Her French manicured nails drumming against the wood like she was keeping time to some cruel melody only she could hear. Son Jeremy sat beside her, examining his phone like it contained the secrets of the universe, like the woman who'd carried him for 9 months and raised him for 34 years wasn't even worth a glance. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March. The forsythia outside my window was just beginning to bloom, those tiny yellow flowers that Robert had always said reminded him of hope. 3 weeks later, I would discover that my son and his wife had spent 4 years systematically destroying my marriage from the inside out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That Tuesday, I just stood there, holding a bag of groceries I'd bought for them again, and felt the familiar burn spreading through my chest like wildfire. Shame, I thought. The shame of being the wife who wasn't enough, who'd driven her husband into the arms of a woman named Bright Eyes 29. The shame of being 67 years old and still not understanding what I'd done wrong in my marriage of 42 years. The shame of standing in my own kitchen, in the house I'd helped pay for, feeling like I needed to apologize for existing. I'm just saying, Amber continued, inspecting her nails like they might contain some imperfection worth examining. If you'd been more attentive to Robert's needs, maybe he wouldn't have needed to look elsewhere for companionship. It's not Jeremy's fault that you have to live with that guilt now. We're just trying to be here for you, despite everything. Despite everything. As if my husband's infidelity, the infidelity I would later discover never actually happened, was a burden they were graciously helping me carry. Jeremy finally glanced up from his phone. His eyes, so much like his father's, held none of Robert's warmth. Mom, we're not trying to be harsh here. We're trying to help you understand something important about moving forward. His voice had that practiced patience, that carefully modulated tone people use with confused children or difficult elderly relatives. Dad left everything to you, even though, well, the circumstances. The least you can do is help us with the down payment on the house. After everything we've done for you since he passed, it's only fair. Only fair. I'd heard that phrase 17 times in the past month alone. Always before a request for money. The kitchen renovation they desperately needed, because their appliances were practically prehistoric. The car payment they couldn't quite make because of some unexpected expense that seemed to happen every month. Investment opportunity that was practically guaranteed to double their money if only I could front the initial capital. Each time, Amber would mention Robert's affair. Just a little dig, just enough to twist the knife. Just enough to remind me that I was the wife who hadn't been enough, the woman who'd driven her husband away, the failure who owed them something for her shortcomings. And each time I'd feel that familiar wave of guilt crash over me, drowning out the small voice in my head that whispered something wasn't right. Let me think about it, I said, which was what I always said before I always gave them what they wanted. Amber's smile didn't reach her eyes. It never did, I realized later, but at the time I told myself I was being uncharitable. Was my daughter-in-law. She'd married my son. She must love our family, even if she had an odd way of showing it. Of course, Eleanor. Take your time. It's not like we're struggling or anything. The sarcasm dripped from her words like honey laced with arsenic. She stood, slinging her designer bag, a Coach purse I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago, over her shoulder. Yereme, let's go. Your mother needs space to process her feeling. You know how emotional she gets. After they left, I put away their groceries. Organic vegetables and expensive imported cheese, grass-fed beef, and artisanal bread. The kind of food I never bought for myself anymore because what was the point of cooking elaborate meals for one? I'd started eating toast for dinner most nights, soup from a can, whatever required the least effort to prepare and the least energy to clean up after. Refrigerator, not from age, though my joints had started aching in the mornings. Not from weakness, though I'd lost 15 pounds since Robert died, and my doctor kept making concerned noises about my weight. From rage? Rage I wasn't supposed to feel. Rage I'd buried so deep I'd almost forgotten it existed. Good mothers didn't resent their children. Good wives didn't drive their husbands away. Good women learn to live with their mistakes and be grateful for whatever scraps of attention their families deigned to throw them. I'd been a good woman my entire life. Where had it gotten me? Alone in a house that echoed with memories, feeding my son's family while I ate canned soup, apologizing for a marriage I thought I'd destroyed. I'd been married to Robert Chen for 42 years. We'd met at a college mixer in 1975, two shy kids who found each other by the punch bowl because neither of us knew how to dance. Future. I was majoring in English literature, dreaming of writing novels, of seeing my name on book spines in libraries. We'd built a life in the suburbs of Hartford, bought our first house in 1982 with a mortgage that terrified us both. Raised Jeremy, watching him grow from a colicky baby into a clever child, into a young man who seemed to know exactly what he wanted from the world. We'd watched our modest investments grow into something comfortable, not wealthy, never wealthy, but comfortable enough that we'd stopped worrying about retirement. Robert was a database engineer, steady and methodical, the kind of man who approached problems like puzzles to be solved. He wasn't particularly romantic in the traditional sense. No surprise bouquets or spontaneous weekend getaways, but he remembered how I liked my coffee and always knew when I needed silence instead of conversation. Whatever mess Jeremy had made that day. I'd been a high school English teacher for 37 years before I retired at 63. I'd guided thousands of teenagers through Shakespeare and Hemingway and Toni Morrison, watched their eyes light up when they finally understood why words mattered. Spent my career teaching other people's children to find their voices. Somewhere along the way, I'd lost my own. We were ordinary, Robert and I. We were happy in the way that long-married couples are happy, not fireworks, but something steadier, something built on decades of shared meals and inside jokes and the comfortable knowledge that someone in the world knew you completely. And then 3 years before Robert died, I found the messages. It was a Thursday evening. Robert had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he took a shower, and I'd picked it up without thinking when it buzzed. We'd never hidden our phones from each other. We'd never needed to. The notification was from someone called Bright Eyes 29. Showed just enough. I've been thinking about you all day. My blood turned to ice. My hands started shaking, that same trembling I'd feel 5 years later, putting away groceries for people who'd stolen my peace of mind. I should have put the phone down. I should have trusted 40 years of marriage, trusted the man I'd built a life with. Something compelled me to open that message, to scroll through the conversation, to read words that would haunt me for years. Flirtation that made my stomach turn. Late-night chats full of heart emojis and winking faces. Plans to meet up when he could get away. Photos, nothing explicit, thank God, but suggestive enough. A younger woman, blonde, smiling into the camera like she knew exactly what she was doing, like she knew exactly what she was taking from me. I can't wait to finally see you in person, she'd written. Soon, Robert had replied. I promise. Son, where we'd held each other through job losses and health scares and the slow accumulation of years. I remember my voice breaking before I even finished asking the question. Who is she, Robert? Who is Bright Eyes 29? He'd looked genuinely confused at first, then defensive, his shoulders drawing up toward his ears the way they always did when he felt attacked. Then angry in anger I'd rarely seen from my quiet, methodical husband. It's not what you think, he'd said, which is what they always say, isn't it? The cheaters, the liars, the people who've been caught red-handed with evidence glowing on their screens, it's not what you think. As if our thoughts are the problem, as if our eyes and hearts have deceived us. Then what is it? I remember my voice cracking on the last word. Tears I couldn't stop sliding down my cheeks. Who is this woman? What are you planning to do with her? She's just someone I talk to, someone who listens as my own reflection, someone who doesn't nag me about every little thing, someone who makes me feel like I'm still, he trailed off, but I heard what he didn't say. Someone who makes me feel like I'm still desirable, still interesting, still worth wanting. We're just talking, Eleanor, he said finally. That's all it is. Just talking. But it wasn't all. I'd seen the messages, the intimacy of them, the way she'd said, I think about you constantly, and he'd replied, You're the best part of my day. The way they discussed meeting in person, what they'd do when they finally saw each other, how much they'd been waiting for that moment. Just talking. As if words couldn't be their own kind of betrayal. We tried therapy, a kind woman named Doctor. Patterson with an office full of fidget toys and a way of asking questions that made us both uncomfortable. Robert promised to end it, to block Bright Eyes 29, to recommit to our marriage. He said, the words in Doctor, Patterson's office, his hand gripping mine like he was afraid I'd float away if he let go. I never met her in person, he kept saying. It was just online. I was stupid and lonely, and I didn't know how to tell you I felt invisible. But I never touched her. I never even tried. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly that I rebuilt our entire marriage around that wanting. I tried to be more attentive. Initiated conversations about his work even though database architecture bored me to tears. Planned weekend activities instead of letting us slip into our separate routines. Bought lingerie I felt ridiculous wearing, makeup I'd stopped bothering with years ago. I tried to become the woman I thought he wanted younger, more exciting, less nagging, even though I was 64 years old and had earned every gray hair on my head. For a while, I thought we'd made it through. Robert seemed more present, more engaged. He'd bring me flowers sometimes, not the fancy kind, but the grocery store bouquets I'd always secretly preferred. He'd hold my hand during our evening walks, point out the birds he'd learned to identify in retirement. I love you, Eleanor, he'd say, and I'd hear the weight behind the words. I'm sorry I almost forgot that. But there was always a shadow, a question I couldn't quite shake. If I'd been enough, would he have looked elsewhere in the first place? If I'd been a better wife, would Bright Eyes 29 have ever existed in his phone? Then Robert died. Heart attack at his desk in the home office he'd set up after retiring from full-time work. He still did consulting projects, still kept his mind sharp with the puzzles of data and systems he'd spent his career solving. He was sitting in his ergonomic chair, a cup of coffee growing cold beside his keyboard, when his heart decided it had done enough. Massive cardiac arrest, the doctors said. He probably didn't suffer. He was probably gone before he knew anything was wrong. Jeremy found him. He'd stopped by to borrow Robert's truck for some project he was working on. Jeremy was always borrowing things, always needing something, and when Robert didn't answer the door, he'd used his spare key. They called me from the hospital, but my husband was already gone. 42 years of marriage ended by a phone call on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I remember I'd been making a grocery list when the phone rang. I remember looking at the tomatoes on my counter, thinking I needed to use them before they went bad. I remember how strange it felt to care about tomatoes while my world was ending. And in my grief, swimming through the logistics of death, the funeral arrangements, the insurance forms, the endless paperwork that accompanies the bureaucracy of loss, I'd found more evidence of Bright Eyes 29. Robert's phone had been recovered from his desk, charged and returned to me along with his wallet, his watch, the wedding ring he'd worn for 4 decades. I'd opened it one night, drunk on grief and cheap wine, looking for what? Evidence that he'd loved me? Proof that our last years together had been real? Instead, I'd found recent messages, exchanges from the week he died. I miss you, Bright Eyes 29 had written. When can we talk? Soon, Robert had replied. Just like before, just like always. I've been busy, but I think about you constantly. He'd been talking to her, right up until the end. All those months of therapy, all those promises, all my desperate attempts to be enough, and he'd never stopped. He'd just gotten better at hiding, so I'd mourned my husband and my marriage both. I'd buried them together in the cold November ground and tried to figure out who I was supposed to be now. The widow whose husband had been looking for an exit, the wife who hadn't been enough to keep him faithful. The failure who'd spent her final years with a man who'd preferred a fantasy on a screen to the reality beside him. The first year after Robert's death was a blur of gray days and sleepless nights. I moved through the motions of living, eating when I remembered, sleeping when exhaustion overtook me, answering the phone when someone called. My doctor prescribed antidepressants. My priest suggested prayer groups. My neighbors brought casseroles that accumulated in my freezer, untouched. Jeremy and Amber had been wonderful. At first, they helped with the funeral arrangements, choosing hymns and flowers, and the wording for the obituary. They dealt with the insurance company, the bank, the endless forms that needed signatures. Amber had even cried at the service, big, theatrical sobs that had made me feel guilty for my own dry-eyed shock. "At least he had you in the end," she'd whispered, squeezing my hand as we stood beside the open grave. "Even if things were complicated, even if the marriage wasn't perfect, at least you were there for him." The marriage wasn't perfect, as if infidelity was just a little bump in the road, a minor complication in an otherwise acceptable relationship. Looking back, I can see how carefully she chose those words. Precisely, they were calibrated to remind me of my failure while appearing to offer comfort. But at the time, drowning in grief and guilt, I just felt grateful that someone was acknowledging the truth I couldn't speak aloud. Funeral. Small things at first: a loan for an unexpected car repair, help with a medical bill their insurance didn't cover. Given freely, grateful to feel useful, grateful that my son still needed me for something. Then the requests got larger. The kitchen renovation that would cost $30,000. The investment opportunity that required $50,000 in capital. The down payment on a house that kept increasing every time we discussed it. And always, always, that delicate reference to Robert's affair. That gentle twist of the knife. "I know you've been struggling since Dad's situation came to light," Jeremy would say. "We just want to help you feel less alone. And honestly, Mom, don't you think he owes us something for putting us through that? For putting you through that? Least his money can do is help his son." As if Robert's supposed infidelity was a debt I needed to repay. As if my guilt could be measured in dollars and deposited into their bank account. And I'd paid. God help me, I'd paid, because what else did I have? My friends had drifted away during the crisis in my marriage that happens when you pour everything into trying to save a relationship, when you cancel plans and decline invitations and slowly shrink your world down to the size of your problem. My colleagues from the high school had retired or moved away or simply lost touch in the way that work friendships do when the common ground disappears. Jeremy and Amber were my family now, my only family. They visited twice a week, every Tuesday and Saturday like clockwork, and called to check on me between visits. They made me feel less alone in this empty house that still smelled like Robert's coffee, still held his clothes in the closet, still echoed with the memory of his voice. Even if those visits always came with a price tag, even if I'd started dreading the sound of their car in the driveway, even if I lay awake at night wondering how much of my savings remained, and how long it would last if I kept giving at this rate, and what would happen to me when the money finally ran out. I kept a mental tally because that's the kind of person I am. Kind of person who remembers numbers, who balances checkbooks by hand, who knows exactly how much she's spent, and on what. In the 5 years since Robert died, I'd given Jeremy and Amber over $300,000. $300,000. More than I'd ever spent on myself. More than Robert and I had paid for our first house. Enough to have lived comfortably for the rest of my life, if I'd kept it. Enough to travel, to explore, to do all the things we'd promised ourselves we'd do in retirement. Instead, it had disappeared into their kitchen renovation, which they'd redone twice. Their car payments for vehicles that were always being traded in for something newer. Their investment opportunities which somehow never paid off. Their endless stream of emergencies and necessities and absolute requirements that always, always, always needed my immediate financial attention. And new reminders of my failures. You know, Amber had said last month, inspecting the carpet in my living room like it offended her personally, If you sold this house and moved into something smaller, you'd have a lot more liquid assets. You're not using all this space anyway. It's not like you entertain anymore. Not like you entertain anymore. Because entertaining requires friends, and I'd given up my friends to save my marriage, and now I was alone with nothing but my guilt and my increasingly empty bank account. Jeremy and I have been talking, she'd continued, not waiting for me to respond, and we think it would be healthier for you to downsize. Less maintenance, fewer memories, a fresh start. Could help you find something appropriate. A nice condo, maybe? Something manageable. Something that would free up the equity in this house. Something that would give them access to more of Robert's money. Something that would leave me with even less than I had now. They'd left with promises to send me listings. But that night, alone in the bedroom I'd shared with Robert for 40 years, I'd felt something shift inside my chest. A crack in the armor of guilt I'd been wearing since I'd found those messages. A tiny spark of something that might have been anger, or might have been self-preservation, or might have just been the first stirring of exhaustion. I was tired of being reminded of my failures, tired of apologizing for a marriage I'd tried so hard to save, tired of watching my savings disappear into their endless needs while I ate soup from a can and wondered if I could afford to fix the leak in my roof. Tired of being the person they'd taught me to be. That Tuesday night, after putting away their groceries and eating my usual dinner of toast and tea, I wandered into Robert's old office and sat in his chair. 5 years since he'd died, and I still couldn't bring myself to clear out this room. His coffee mug sat on the desk, with the ring stain on the bottom I'd always nagged him about. His calendar was frozen on the date he died, November 17th, with an appointment marked Dr. Patterson, 2 p.m., that he'd never kept. His filing cabinet, stuffed with decades of paperwork I'd been too afraid and too exhausted to sort. Jeremy had been after me to clean it out. We could rent a storage unit, he'd suggested last week, his eyes scanning the room like he was calculating the value of everything in it. Get all Dad's stuff out of the house. Fresh start, Mom. It's not healthy to live in a shrine. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to let go of the man who'd betrayed me, to stop surrounding myself with reminders of what I'd lost. Or maybe, and this thought came to me like a whisper in the dark, maybe Jeremy just wanted access to whatever was in these files, whatever secrets Robert might have left behind. I pulled open the filing cabinet drawer. Tax returns from decades past. Insurance policies with premiums we'd stopped paying years ago. Warranties for appliances we'd replaced. The ordinary detritus of a life lived in paperwork. And there, nestled between tax returns from 2003 and old insurance policies I should have thrown away years ago, was Robert's laptop. The one I thought he'd had at the office when he died. The one I'd assumed was lost or given away or buried somewhere in the chaos of those first weeks. The one I'd stopped thinking about because thinking about it meant thinking about what might be on it. My hands were steadier now as I pulled it out. The battery was long dead. Of course, 5 years sitting in a filing cabinet would drain anything. But the charger was in the desk drawer, exactly where Robert always kept it. Methodical to the end, my husband. Everything in its place. I plugged it in, waited. The screen flickered to life, and for a moment I was back in this room 5 years ago, watching Robert work, bringing him coffee, existing in the comfortable silence of a long marriage. Then the password prompt appeared, and I was alone again. I'd been married to the man for 42 years. I knew his passwords like I knew my own heartbeat. Variations on our anniversary, Jeremy's birthday, our old cat's name, the street we'd lived on when we first got married. On the third try, Whiskers 1982, because he'd loved that stupid cat it opened. His email was still logged in. Thousands of messages, years of correspondence, frozen in digital amber. I scrolled through work emails about projects I didn't understand, spam promising discounts on things he'd never buy, newsletters from organizations he'd supported. My heart hammered against my ribs. What was I looking for? More evidence of his betrayal? Confirmation that I'd failed him? Proof that the guilt I'd been carrying for 5 years was justified? Then I saw it. A folder in his documents labeled in the careful way Robert labeled everything. Clear, specific, unmistakable. Bright Eyes evidence. Evidence. I clicked it open with fingers that had started shaking again. Inside the folder were screenshots. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. Messages from Bright Eyes. 2-9. The flirtatious exchanges I'd seen on his phone 3 years before he died. The same words that had haunted my dreams, that had made me feel so small and worthless and replaceable. But these screenshots had something else. Something I'd never thought to look for. Metadata. IP addresses logged in the corner of each image. Time stamps down to the second. And notes, in Robert's precise handwriting, scanned and saved as PDF files. Same IP as Jay's apartment, confirmed 3/15. Reverse image search results photos from stock photo. Purchased 2018. Phone number traces to burner phone purchased at Best Buy. Farmington location, 2/22. Receipt in separate folder. Jay's apartment. Jeremy. My vision tunneled. The edges of the screen went fuzzy, and for a moment, I thought I might faint. I gripped the edge of the desk, forced myself to breathe, forced myself to keep reading. There were more files. Spreadsheets tracking every message, every login time, every piece of evidence Robert had collected. You pay serious money for. Credit card receipts from an electronics store showing the purchase of a cheap laptop and a prepaid phone on a date I recognized 3 months before the first Bright Eyes message had appeared on Robert's phone. The credit card was Amber's. I opened another file, a Word document dated 6 months before Robert died. The file name was simple. For Eleanor, my husband's last letter to me. Eleanor, if you're reading this, something has happened to me, and I wasn't able to tell you the truth in person. I've been trying to find the right time, the right words, the right way to explain something that I still struggle to believe myself. But if I'm gone and you've found these files, then you need to know. Bright Eyes 29 was never real. It's Jeremy. Jeremy and Amber created that account. They've been catfishing me for almost 4 years now, pretending to be a younger woman, building a relationship designed to destroy our marriage from the inside out. I know how insane this sounds. And thinking that grief has made me paranoid, or that I'm making excuses for my own behavior. I didn't want to believe it either. For the longest time, I thought I was going crazy, seeing patterns that weren't there, looking for someone to blame besides myself. But I'm not wrong, Eleanor. I hired a private investigator last year when things stopped adding up. When Bright Eyes canceled our third planned meeting at the last minute. When the IP addresses kept tracing back to the same location. When I realized that every photo she'd ever sent me could be found on stock photo websites purchased with a credit card that traces back to our daughter-in-law. The IP addresses all trace back to Jeremy and Amber's apartment. The photos are stock images. The meetings they tried to arrange were always canceled at the last minute because there was no Bright Eyes to meet. There was never anyone on the other end of those messages except our son and his wife, typing lies into a keyboard. I think they wanted me to leave you, to change my will, to leave everything to Jeremy out of guilt or anger or both. They wanted me to feel so ashamed of what I was doing that I'd overcompensate, that I'd try to buy their silence or earn their forgiveness by giving them everything. When I started pulling away from Bright Eyes after our therapy sessions, when I started trying to repair our marriage instead of destroying it, they got more aggressive, more explicit in their messages. They tried to force my hand, to make me commit to something I could never take back. But I didn't take the bait, Eleanor. I never met anyone. I never touched anyone. I was talking to a ghost our son invented, and I was falling for a trap designed to steal everything we built together. I've been documenting everything. Every message, every IP trace, every piece of evidence that proves what they've done. I haven't told you because I couldn't prove why they do this. I needed to understand their end game before I accused our own son of something so monstrous. Relationship with Jeremy if I was wrong. But I'm not wrong, Eleanor. I'm certain now the investigators' reports are conclusive. The evidence is overwhelming. Our son and his wife have been trying to destroy our marriage for 4 years, and the only reason they haven't succeeded is that I figured out their game before they could finish playing it. I've contacted Andrew Morrison at Morrison Law. He knows everything. I've started the process of changing our will to protect you by the time you read this. The new documents should be filed and official. Jeremy will receive $5,000 and nothing more. Everything else goes to you, because you've been my partner in all things, and you deserve to live without manipulation or fear. The original copies of all evidence are in our safe deposit box at First National Bank, Box 247. The key is in my desk, taped under the bottom drawer where I always hide things I don't want to lose. I love you, Eleanor, my life. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I let you carry the weight of guilt for something that was never your fault. You were always enough. You were always more than enough. Whatever happens, please know that Bright Eyes was never real, and I never stopped being yours. Robert P. S. I've scheduled an appointment with Dr. Patterson for next week. I was going to tell you everything then. Ask for her help in finding the words. I hope I got the chance. If I didn't, I hope this letter finds you, and I hope you can forgive me for keeping the secret until I was sure. I love you. I don't know how long I sat there. Outside, the sun had set hours ago. The house was dark, except for the glow of Robert's laptop screen, his words burning into my retinas like brands. I read the letter again. Then again. Then a third time, as if repetition might make it less impossible, less world-shattering, less true. Robert hadn't betrayed me. He'd been trying to protect me. For 3 years, he'd carried this knowledge alone, while pretending nothing was wrong, while letting me believe the lie so I wouldn't have to face the truth about our son, Yereme, the baby I'd carried for 9 months, feeling his kicks against my ribs in the middle of the night. The toddler who'd clung to my leg when he was afraid of thunderstorms. The teenager I'd helped with college applications. The young man I'd watched walk across the stage to receive his diploma. The adult I'd welcomed into my home every Tuesday and Saturday for the past 5 years. My son had spent 4 years systematically destroying his parents' marriage. For money, for inheritance, for a future where he got everything and I got nothing but guilt. And when Robert died, before they could complete their plan, they'd simply pivoted. They'd weaponized my grief instead. Every cruel comment about my failure as a wife. Every subtle dig about Robert's wandering eye. Every guilt-laden request for money, wrapped in the implication that I owed them restitution for not being enough. Call full of false concern. Every moment of support that was really just another opportunity to remind me of my shame. It had all been lies, built on a foundation of lies, constructed by my own son and the woman he'd married. I found the key exactly where Robert said it would be, taped under the bottom drawer of his desk with the meticulous care he'd brought to everything, waiting 5 years for me to look. Small, brass, ordinary. The key to a safe deposit box that held the evidence of my son's betrayal. I held it in my palm and felt something shift inside my chest. Not grief anymore. Not the heavy, suffocating weight that had pressed down on me for 5 years, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to remember who I'd been before Bright Eyes 29 had stolen my marriage and my self-worth. Rage. Pure, clean, clarifying rage. The kind of anger that burns away everything unnecessary and leaves you standing in the ashes of who you used to be, ready to become someone new. The next morning, I went to the bank. First National had been our bank for 40 years. The manager remembered me from when Robert and I had opened our first joint account, 2 young people pooling their resources for a future they could barely imagine. She'd sent flowers when Robert died. "Mrs. Chen," she said when I approached her desk, her face softening with sympathy. "It's so good to see you. How can I help you today?" "I need to access safe deposit box 247, I said, and my voice didn't shake. "My husband's box." She nodded, pulled up the records. "Of course. You're listed as a joint holder. Do you have your key?" I showed her the small brass key, and she led me to the vault. The safe deposit box was larger than I'd expected. When she left me alone in the private viewing room, I opened it with hands that trembled only slightly and found everything Robert had promised. Manila folders, neatly labeled. Investigator reports Phase 1. Investigator reports phase 2. Message logs, IP trace, financial records, timeline, documents, with evidence, with the meticulous proof of my son's betrayal. There were photographs of phone receipts showing burner phones purchased at a Best Buy 15 minutes from Jeremy and Amber's apartment. Credit card statements highlighting the stock photo purchases, the laptop they'd used only for this deception, the VPN service they'd subscribed to in a futile attempt to hide their tracks. There were printouts of the investigators' findings. Photographs of Amber picking up one of the burner phones at a Verizon store. The records showing that every single Bright Eyes login originated from the same 3 locations: Jeremy's apartment, Amber's office, and just once from the Starbucks around the corner from their building. And there was the updated will, signed and notarized 2 weeks before Robert died, witnessed by Andrew Morrison and his paralegal, to prevent contest of this will. The remainder of my estate, in its entirety, I leave to my beloved wife, Eleanor Chen, who has been my partner, my confidant, and my greatest love for 42 years. There was a sticky note attached to the will, in Robert's handwriting. Trust Andrew. He knows everything. He'll help you. I sat in that small room, surrounded by evidence of my son's betrayal, and felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. Clarity. The fog that had descended on my life after Robert's death. The confusion, the guilt, the constant second-guessing of every decision lifted like mist in the morning sun. For the first time in years, I could see clearly, think clearly, plan clearly. I wasn't a failure. I had never been a failure. I was a woman who'd been manipulated by the people who were supposed to love her most. A woman who'd been made to carry guilt that was never hers to bear. A woman who'd literally paid, $300,000 worth for a sin she'd never committed. And now I knew the truth. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I called Andrew Morrison from my car in the bank parking lot. He remembered me immediately. "Eleanor," he said, his voice warm with recognition. "I've been wondering when I'd hear from you. You knew? About the will? About everything?" "Robert told me everything, made me promise to keep it confidential until you came to me yourself." He said. Andrew paused, and I heard him take a breath. "He said you'd find the files eventually, when you were ready. He wanted you to discover the truth on your own timeline, not have it forced on you. He was going to tell me. The week he died, I know. He'd made an appointment with your therapist, wanted to break the news with support in place. He was terrified of how you'd react. Not because he didn't trust you, but because he knew how much it would hurt. He wanted to protect you from that pain as long as he could." My eyes burned with tears. I hadn't let myself cry in years. Tears for Robert, who'd carried this burden alone. Marriage I'd thought was damaged, when really it had been under attack. Tears for all the years I'd wasted on guilt and grief that had been manufactured, calculated, designed to make me vulnerable. "Can I come see you?" I asked. "I need to understand my options. This afternoon, 2:00. I'll clear my schedule." I ended the call and sat in my car, watching people walk in and out of the bank, living their ordinary lives. For 5 years, I'd been living someone else's story. The story of the wife who wasn't enough, the mother who had to earn her son's love with money and self-abasement. That story was over now. It was time to write a new one. Before my appointment with Andrew, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Diane. Diane Kowalski had been my best friend for 2 decades. We'd met at Jefferson High School in 1987, both of us new English teachers trying to survive the chaos of public education. We'd bonded over shared frustrations with the curriculum and shared appreciation for cheap wine and good novels. For 20 years, we'd met every Tuesday night without fail dinner, or drinks, or just sitting in one of our living rooms talking about everything and nothing. Then Robert's affair, the affair that never happened, had consumed my life. I'd canceled our Tuesday nights to work on my marriage. I declined her calls because I was too ashamed to talk about what was happening. I'd let our friendship wither because I couldn't bear to be seen by someone who'd known me before, when I was still whole, she answered on the second ring. Eleanor? Her voice was warm with surprise and something that sounded like relief. My God, I was just thinking about you. Were you really? My voice cracked on the words. Every Tuesday, actually. That's when we used to get together. Still think of it as Eleanor Knight in my head, even though it's been... She paused, counting. God, how long has it been? 5 years? 6? Too long, I said. Far too long. So sorry for not trying harder. Diane, I interrupted, because I could hear her spiraling, because I'd missed her voice more than I'd let myself admit. Can I ask you something? Anything. Did you ever like Jeremy? There was a long pause. So long I thought maybe the call had dropped. Then, carefully, with the diplomatic precision of someone choosing her words, do you want the polite answer or the truth? The truth, please. He always felt calculating. Diane's voice had dropped the way it did when she was saying something that mattered. Even as a kid, though I tried to tell myself I was being unfair, he'd figure out what people wanted to hear, and that's what he'd say. He'd watch everyone in a room, sizing them up like he was running some kind of cost-benefit analysis in his head. She paused, and I heard her take a breath. Robert saw it, I think. I watched him watching Jeremy sometimes, and there was this look in his eyes. Not disappointment exactly, but wariness. Like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. Didn't see it, because you're his mother and you loved him the way mothers do. Unconditionally. Without reservation. But the rest of us noticed. And Amber? Same energy. Maybe worse. Because she doesn't even try to hide the way she'd look at your house, your car, your jewelry, like she was cataloging everything. The way she'd ask about your finances disguised as concern. I tried to say something once, years ago, but you seemed happy to have them around, and I thought maybe I was being judgmental. I closed my eyes, remembering all the times Diane had started to say something and stopped. All the times she'd changed the subject when Jeremy came up. All the times I'd brushed off her attempts at gentle honesty because I couldn't bear to hear what she was trying to tell me. You weren't being judgmental, I said. You were right. What happened, Eleanor? What's going on? Can I tell you over coffee? Are you free today? For you? Diane's voice cracked with something that sounded like tears. I'm free whenever you need me. I've been waiting 5 years for this call. Andrew Morrison's office was in an old Victorian house that had been converted to professional suites. The waiting room smelled like coffee and old books comfortable, like a professor's study rather than a lawyer's lair. Andrew himself was in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been Robert's attorney for decades, handling the legal details of our lives with quiet competence, the house closing, the business contracts, the retirement planning. Now he was going to help me end my relationship with my son. The will is airtight, he said, once I'd spread the evidence on his conference table. Roberts specifically included the $5,000 bequest to prevent any contest. It's a legal threshold that makes it much harder for disinherited parties to claim they were forgotten. He knew what he was doing. What about the evidence? The catfishing, the manipulation, the money I've given them since he died? Andrew leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. That's more complicated. What they did could potentially be prosecuted under several statutes: wire fraud, elder financial abuse, intentional infliction of emotional distress. But any prosecution would require you to testify to make all of this public. Your son's face in the papers. Your family's dirty laundry aired for everyone to see. I thought about it. Really thought about it. Did I want courtrooms and lawyers and the grinding machinery of criminal justice? Did I want to sit on a witness stand and describe, in detail, how my own son had catfished his father and then manipulated his mother for money? Did I want to become that woman, the woman whose son betrayed her, the family scandal everyone whispered about at parties? No, I said finally. This stays private. But I want them to know that I know. And then I want them gone from my life. Andrew smiled. It wasn't a kind smile, more like the smile of someone who's been waiting for the right moment to unveil a particularly satisfying plan. I think I can help with that, he said. There's something called a cease and desist with teeth. We put together a comprehensive document outlining everything we have on them, everything we could pursue if we chose to. We make clear that any further contact, any attempt to contest the will, any effort to spread misinformation about you will result in the immediate release of all evidence to both law enforcement and the media. So they have a choice: disappear quietly or face consequences. Exactly. Most people in their position take the quiet option, especially people like your son and daughter-in-law who have reputations and careers to protect. The threat is usually enough. And if it's not, then we follow through. Every document, every photograph, every receipt goes to the district attorney's office. But Eleanor, he leaned forward, his eyes meeting mine. I don't think it will come to that. I've seen a lot of manipulators in my career, and they have one thing in common. They're cowards. They prey on people they think are weaker than them. Once they realize their victim has teeth of her own, they run. I thought about Jeremy's face, about Amber's French manicured nails drumming on my table, about the way they'd looked at me for 5 years like I was a resource to be managed, a problem to be solved, an obstacle between them and the money they felt they deserved. Let's do it, I said. I want those letters ready by Friday. I spent the next 3 days preparing. I met Diane for coffee at our old spot, the cafe, where we'd wasted 1,000 Tuesday nights in our 20s and 30s. Told her everything well, almost everything. The parts that mattered. The catfishing, the manipulation, the 5 years of guilt I'd been carrying for a sin I'd never committed. She cried. I didn't. I'd cried enough. I can't believe it, she kept saying, gripping my hands across the table. I mean, I can believe it, because I never trusted them, but I can't believe they'd actually do this. Their own parents, their own family. People do terrible things when they want money badly enough. But why? Why would they need your money so desperately? Jeremy has a job. Amber has a job. They're not starving. I'd thought about this too. In the hours since I'd found Robert's files, I'd analyzed every piece of evidence, looked for the why behind the what. The answer, I'd realized, was both simple and devastating. Because they wanted more than they had. Because they felt entitled to it. Because somewhere along the way, Jeremy decided that what Robert and I had built belonged to him, not us. Amber just wanted to be rich, to live the life she thought she deserved, to have everything without having to earn it. But you gave them money, hundreds of thousands of dollars. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. Every dollar they got just convinced them there was more to be had. Every time I gave in, they saw it as proof that their strategy was working. Diane shook her head, disbelief and anger warring on her face. What are you going to do? I'm going to end it. Permanently. Out who I am without them. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You know who you are, Eleanor. You're the smartest, kindest, strongest woman I've ever known. They just made you forget it for a while. I felt something warm spread through my chest. Not love, exactly though there was love there too. Relief. The relief of being seen by someone who'd known me before. Before Robert's fake affair, before Jeremy's betrayal, before I'd shrunk myself down to fit the story they'd written for me. I've missed you, I said. I'm sorry I let us drift apart. Stop it! You were surviving. Now you're going to start living again. Diane smiled. The same smile she'd had when we were young teachers facing down our first parent-teacher conferences together. And I'm going to be right here to watch you do it. I invited Jeremy and Amber to dinner that Friday. Amber seemed surprised but pleased when I called. Dinner? Your place? That's unexpected. Usually you seem so tired on Friday nights. Light. Family dinner. The way we used to when Robert was alive. Well, I suppose we could move some things around. What time? 6 o'clock. And bring your appetite, I'm making pot roast. Pot roast? Robert's favorite. The meal I'd made for every special occasion in our marriage, birthdays, anniversaries, the night Jeremy graduated from college. A meal that meant something. Meal that marked endings and beginnings. This time, it would mark both. They arrived at 6 on the dot. Jeremy brought wine, expensive wine, the kind he couldn't afford on his salary, the kind he'd probably put on a credit card he expected me to pay off. Amber wore a new dress, designer by the look of it, and her face was carefully made up like she was going to a party instead of a family dinner. "Mom," Jeremy said, kissing my cheek with the practiced affection of someone who'd learned the gesture from a manual. "You look rested, different, somehow." "I've been sleeping better lately," I said, which was true. "Come. The roast is almost ready." Amber immediately started critiquing my kitchen, the way she always did. "These tiles, Eleanor, they're so dated. We really should consider updating. I know a wonderful contractor. He did our kitchen. He could give you a quote." "Actually," I said, "I've been thinking about making some changes around here." "Really?" Amber's eyes lit up with the hungry gleam I'd learned to recognize. "That's wonderful. A fresh start. It's exactly what you need." I couldn't agree more. Jeremy poured the wine without asking if I wanted any, the way he always did. Taking over. Assuming. Treating me like a guest in my own home, like someone whose preferences didn't matter. I watched him and tried to see the baby I'd nursed, the child I'd raised. All I saw was a stranger, someone who'd calculated my worth in dollars. Someone who'd weaponized my love. Someone who'd bet on my guilt and my loneliness and my desperate need to be a good mother, and expected to win. I set the table with our wedding china, hand across the table, and told me I was still the most beautiful thing in his world. At the time, I'd thought he was lying, making up for Bright Eyes 2-9, trying to assuage his guilt. Now I knew he'd been telling the simple truth, and I'd been too blinded by manufactured shame to see it. We sat down to dinner. Amber launched into a story about their latest vacation, a cruise. Apparently, one of those week-long affairs with unlimited buffets and stops at tropical islands. Another expense they somehow couldn't quite afford despite both working full-time jobs. "We put it on credit," Jeremy said casually, as if this were perfectly normal. "Figure we'll pay it off over time. You only live once, right?" "You'll pay it off," I said. "Or I will." He had the grace to look momentarily embarrassed. "I mean, if things get tight, I know you'd want to help." "You always do." "Yes," I said. "I always have, haven't I?" I set Robert's laptop on the table between us. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Amber's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Jeremy had gone very still, the way prey goes still when it senses a predator nearby. "I found something interesting this week," I said pleasantly, my voice light, conversational. "Want to guess what it was?" "Mom," Jeremy started. "Bright Eyes 2-9, I said. "Remember her? The woman who ruined my marriage? The woman I've spent 5 years feeling guilty about, feeling like I wasn't enough, like I'd failed your father so badly he needed to look elsewhere for companionship? I don't know what your—" I opened the laptop, turned it to face them. "Your IP address, your burner phone, your stock photos purchased with Amber's credit card. 4 years of messages, Jeremy. 4 years of pretending to be someone else, flirting with your own father, trying to destroy his marriage to your mother so you could get your hands on our money." Amber had gone white. Not the flushing pallor of embarrassment, the bloodless white of shock, of fear, of someone watching their carefully constructed world collapse around them. Jeremy's jaw worked soundlessly. He looked from the laptop to me and back again, his eyes wide, his composure crumbling. For the first time in as long as I could remember, he had no words prepared, no manipulation ready, no angle to work. "Did you know he figured it out?" I continued, keeping my voice steady. "Did you know your father hired an investigator? That he documented everything, every message, every login, every piece of evidence that proves what you did? That he changed his will 2 weeks before he died, leaving you exactly $5,000 and not a penny more?" "You can't prove," I laughed. It came out harder than I expected. Sharper, the sound of a woman who'd stopped caring about being liked. "I have 17 different forms of proof, actually. metadata from every message you sent, phone records showing the burner phone purchases, credit card receipts from the electronics store where you bought your catfishing equipment, a signed affidavit from the private investigator who tracked your scheme from beginning to end, handwriting explaining everything. I pulled a thick folder from beneath my chair, copies of everything, neatly organized, all of it notarized, all of it stored with his attorney, all of it admissible in court, should I choose to pursue charges. Jeremy found his voice. You wouldn't take this public. Wouldn't do that to your own son? Think about what people would say. Think about your reputation. You're right, I said, and watched hope flicker in his eyes. Won't take it public. Because I'm not cruel like you. I'm not calculating like Amber. I won't destroy you publicly the way you tried to destroy me privately. I pulled out 2 envelopes, pushed them across the table. That's a cease and desist letter from my attorney. You will have no further contact with me. You will not call. You will not visit. You will not ask for money. You will not spread any information about me, true or false. You will not contest your father's will. You will not speak to any of my friends, my neighbors, or anyone else in my life. Amber grabbed her purse, her movements jerky with panic. This is insane. Jeremy, we should go. Sit down, I said, and something in my voice made her freeze. I'd spent years teaching teenagers, 37 years of commanding attention, of projecting authority, of making people listen when they didn't want to. I'd forgotten that voice existed. I'd let them make me forget. But I remembered now. I'm not finished, I said. Amber sank back into her chair. I looked at my son, really looked at him, for the first time in years. Tried to find something of the baby I'd loved, the child I'd protected, the young man I'd been so proud of. All I saw was a stranger. Someone who'd learned to mimic love without ever feeling it. Someone who'd calculated every word, every gesture, every moment of apparent affection as part of a larger strategy. Did you ever love me? I asked. Even a little? Or was I always just an asset to manage? A resource to be exploited? A problem standing between you and the money you felt entitled to? He didn't answer. Out. And in his silence, I heard everything I needed to know. Here's what's going to happen, I said. I'm going to finish my dinner. You're going to leave and never come back. That $5,000 your father left you? Consider it payment for the 18 years I spent raising you. Everything else, the house, the investments, the insurance, every dollar I have is mine. I'm going to spend it exactly how I want. I picked up my fork, cut a piece of pot roast, chewed slowly, deliberately, while they watched in stunned silence. Maybe I'll travel, I continued. I've never been to Italy, and I've always wanted to see Florence. Maybe I'll donate some of it to charity causes that actually help people instead of enabling greed. Maybe I'll use it to fund scholarships for students who actually deserve help, students who would never dream of catfishing their own parents for money. I took a sip of water, letting the words settle. But whatever I do, you won't be part of it. You used my grief against me. You turned my marriage into a weapon. You made me believe I was worthless, unlovable, a failure as a wife and a woman. You stole 5 years of my life and $300,000, and you did it all with a smile on your face and sympathy in your voice. I met Jeremy's eyes. He looked away first. But your father knew the truth. He loved me. He protected me, even when he couldn't do it in person. And now, I'm going to honor that love by protecting myself, by choosing myself, by believing, finally, that I deserve to be treated with basic human decency. I set down my fork. Get out of my house. If you violate any term of that agreement, if you try to contact me, if you spread a single word about me to anyone, everything I have goes to the police. And we'll see how you enjoy explaining wire fraud and elder financial abuse to a prosecutor. They left without another word. Amber was crying real tears this time, I suspected, tears of rage and frustration and lost opportunity. Jeremy didn't look back. relationship, taking what he wanted and leaving the damage for someone else to clean up. I heard their car start. Watched through the window as the taillights disappeared down the street, smaller and smaller until they vanished around the corner. Then I sat at my table, alone in the quiet house, and finished Robert's favorite meal. For the first time in 5 years, I wasn't lonely. The days after they left were strange. I'd expected to feel something grief, perhaps, for the relationship I'd lost. Relief, maybe, that the confrontation was over. Doubt, questioning whether I'd been too harsh, whether I should have given Jeremy one more chance. Instead, I felt quiet, clear, like I'd been carrying a heavy pack for years and had finally set it down. I moved through my house differently, noticed things I'd stopped seeing, the way the morning light fell across the kitchen floor, the view of the garden from the living room window, the particular silence of a home that belonged only to me. For 5 years, this house had been a prison of guilt and grief. Now it was just a house. Walls and windows and memories, good and bad. I could keep it or leave it, stay or go. The choice was mine. That thought, the choice was mine, felt like learning to breathe again. Diane came over the first Saturday after the confrontation, brought scones and coffee and a determination to check on me that reminded me of why we'd been friends for so long. "How are you holding up?" she asked, settling into my kitchen like she'd never left. "And don't say fine, because that's what you always say and it's never true. I'm okay, actually. Really okay." "Okay isn't good enough." She pushed a scone toward me. "You've just cut off your only child. That's allowed to hurt." "I know." I took the scone. Not because I was hungry, but because Diane had made it, and that meant something. But here's the thing, I don't think I lost my child last Friday. I think I lost him years ago. Maybe I never had him at all. Maybe the person I loved was always just a mask he wore to get what he wanted. That's a terrible thing to realize about your own son. It is, but it's also a relief, in a way. I can stop trying to be enough for someone who was never going to accept enough. I can stop apologizing for existing. I can just be. Diane was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, and I saw tears in her eyes. "Robert would be so proud of you," she said. "The way you handled this, the way you're handling this, I hope so." I looked out the window at the garden Robert and I had planted together 20 years ago. The roses were still there, the hydrangeas we'd argued about, the apple tree we'd planted when Jeremy was born. I hope he knows, somehow, that I finally understand what he was trying to protect me from. "He knows," Diane said firmly. "Wherever he is, he knows." We sat together in comfortable silence, the way old friends can. 2 women in a kitchen, drinking coffee, watching the morning light change the shadows on the walls. "What are you going to do now?" she asked finally. I thought about it, really thought about it. "I don't know," I said, and found myself smiling. That's the beautiful part. For the first time in 5 years, I have absolutely no idea. We started meeting for coffee again. Tuesdays, like we used to our old tradition, resurrected after 5 years in the grave. Diane brought her book club friends to meet me. Margaret, who'd taught chemistry at a different high school and had stories that made me laugh until I cried. Patricia, who'd raised 4 children and divorced 2 husbands and had strong opinions about everything. Louise, who was 78 and still ran marathons and who told me, with great authority, that the best decade of her life had been her 70s. "You're just getting started," she said, patting my hand. "Trust everything that came before was practice." I remembered how to laugh at jokes that weren't at my expense, how to share stories without checking first whether they made me seem like a good mother, how to talk about something other than Robert's affair or my failures or my desperate need to be useful to people who didn't deserve my use. I remembered how to be Eleanor, not the wife, not the mother, not the victim, just Eleanor. A woman with opinions and preferences and a wicked sense of humor she'd forgotten she possessed. It felt like coming home to myself. I sold the house 6 months later. Not because I had to, the new will was clear, and Jeremy's $5,000 had been sent to him without fanfare or further communication. Not because I couldn't afford to stay, but because the house held too many ghosts. Too many memories tied to people who'd lied to me, spaces haunted by grief I no longer needed to carry. I bought a smaller place near Diane, in a quiet neighborhood where the houses had porches and the neighbors waved when you walked by. A two-bedroom cottage with a garden that needed work and a sunroom that flooded with light every morning. I put Robert's desk in the sunroom, his coffee mug clean now but still sitting in its place of honor. The calendar stayed frozen on November 17th. I'd thought about changing it, but some markers of time deserve to stay where they are. And I started writing. The novel had been in my head for 30 years. Since before Jeremy was born, before Robert's job got demanding, before life accumulated in a way that pushed dreams to the margins. It was about a woman who discovers in her 60s that everything she believed about her life was wrong. A woman who rebuilds herself from the ashes of betrayal, who finds strength she didn't know she possessed, who learns that it's never too late to become the person you were meant to be. I wrote it in the mornings, in my sunroom, with Robert's coffee mug beside my lap. Sometimes I'd look at that mug and imagine he was there with me, reading over my shoulder, making the same jokes about my metaphors he'd made 30 years ago when I first showed him my writing. Too many adjectives, I could hear him say. You don't need to tell people the sun is golden and radiant and burning. Just pick one. Let it do the work. He'd been right about the adjectives. He'd been right about a lot of things. I finished the first draft in 8 months, revised for another 6, found an agent through a friend of Diane's who knew someone in publishing, sold the book to a small press that specialized in literary fiction by women over 50. When I held the finished copy in my hands, my name on the cover, my words between the pages, I cried for the first time since Robert died. Not from grief, from joy. From the overwhelming realization that I'd done it, that I'd survived everything that was meant to destroy me and come out the other side with something beautiful to show for it. Robert would have been so proud. Andrew helped me set up the scholarship fund. We named it the Robert Chen Memorial Scholarship for Resilience. It provided full tuition for students who'd lost parents, who were navigating grief while trying to build futures, who needed someone to believe in them when the world felt impossible. The money came from what I'd been going to give Jeremy. The money I'd been saving unconsciously to make up for my supposed failures. That would have disappeared into his kitchen renovations and cruises and investment opportunities that never panned out. Now, it would help young people who actually deserved help. Young people who would never dream of catfishing their own parents for money. Young people who understood that some things matter more than inheritance. Jeremy would probably hate that I was giving away his money. The thought made me smile every time I wrote a check. I never heard from them again. Once, about 6 months after the confrontation, I saw Amber at the grocery store. She was pushing a cart full of store-brand items, no organic vegetables in sight. Her nails weren't manicured, and her designer bag had been replaced with something practical. She saw me, went pale, turned her cart down another aisle without a word. I bought myself the expensive cheese, the kind I'd been buying for them while I ate toast for dinner and didn't feel guilty about. Sometimes people ask if I miss Jeremy, if I regret cutting him off, if I think there might have been another way. The truth is, I don't miss the person he turned out to be. I miss the person I thought he was, the son who loved me, the child who needed me, the young man I was so proud of. But that person never existed. He was just another lie, another manipulation, another role they'd calculated would work on me. And I don't regret choosing myself. Robert spent the last months of his life trying to protect me. The least I could do was finish the job. I'm 72 now. My novel came out last year. A quiet literary thing about second chances and survival, about women who rebuild themselves after betrayal. It sold moderately well, no bestseller list, but enough to earn out its advance and get some nice reviews. Someone called it a meditation on resilience and the power of truth. Someone else said it captured the particular grief of discovering you've been loved all along. I've started writing another one. I have coffee with friends every Tuesday. Things and survived them and learned to laugh about the parts that don't hurt anymore. I volunteer at the library twice a week, teaching writing workshops for retirees who always wanted to tell their stories but never knew how to begin. Just start with the truth, I tell them. The rest will follow. I date occasionally, though nothing serious. There's a man in my watercolor class, we took it up together. Both of us terrible at painting, but determined to learn who makes me laugh and doesn't ask for more than I'm ready to give. His name is Bernard, and he's 75, and he tells me I'm beautiful with the same quiet certainty Robert used to have. I'm not ready for that yet. But maybe someday. The choice, after all, is mine. Last week, Diane and I were at the farmer's market picking through the spring strawberries when she turned to me and asked the question she'd been asking for a year. Are you happy, Eleanor? I thought about it. Really thought about it the way I think about all the important questions now. I thought about Robert, gone 5 years but still present in the coffee mug on my desk and the roses in my garden. I thought about the novel with my name on the cover and the scholarship fund bearing his name and the students we'd helped who sent thank you letters that made me cry. I thought about the son I'd lost, or rather the son I'd never really had. The grief that came with accepting that and the freedom that came after. I thought about Diane beside me, and Margaret and Patricia and Louise and all the women who'd reminded me that friendship doesn't have an expiration date. That community can be rebuilt. That love takes many forms, and the romantic kind isn't the only one that matters. I thought about myself, Eleanor Chen, 72 years old, survivor of betrayal and architect of her own resurrection. Yeah, I said finally. I think I am. And the remarkable thing, I meant it. There's something powerful about surviving people's worst intentions and coming out whole on the other side. Then the stories they told about you. That your worth isn't determined by their love or their greed or their carefully constructed lies. That you can lose everything you thought, defined you, your marriage, your family, your sense of yourself, and still find something worth keeping in the wreckage. I spent 5 years believing I wasn't enough. 5 years of apologizing for existing. 5 years of giving money and time and energy to people who saw me as an obstacle between them and what they wanted. 5 years of carrying guilt that was never mine to bear for a sin I never committed. And then I found the truth. And the truth, as it turns out, really does set you free. Not immediately, not painlessly, but eventually, inevitably, the truth cuts through the lies and leaves you standing in the clear light of reality. I was enough. I was always enough. I was always more than enough. I just needed to believe it myself. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. Easy to live through. There were nights I didn't think I'd survive it. Nights when the weight of betrayal felt like it would crush me. Nights when I wondered if I'd made a mistake, if I should have given Jeremy one more chance, if cutting off my own child made me the monster they'd been trying to create. But I wanted to share this story because I think there's someone out there who needs to hear it. Someone who's been told they're not enough. Someone who's been made to carry guilt that isn't theirs. Someone who's giving everything, money, time, love, energy to people who take and take and take without ever giving anything real in return. Someone who's been taught that being a good mother means sacrificing yourself completely. That being a good wife means accepting whatever treatment you receive. That being a good woman means shrinking yourself down until you fit into the small space other people have designated for you. You don't owe anyone that sacrifice. You never did. Feel like you do? If they keep reminding you of your failures, keep asking for more than they give, keep treating you like a resource to be managed instead of a person to be loved, maybe it's time to ask yourself what they're really after. Maybe it's time to find Robert's laptop, to open the folder labeled Evidence, to discover the truth that's been waiting for you, hidden under the bottom drawer, taped in place by someone who loved you enough to try to protect you. Maybe it's time to choose yourself. I'd like to think Robert would be proud of how I handled things, that he'd approve of the scholarships, the novel, the quiet life I've built from the ashes of the one that burned down, that he'd be glad I finally found my way back to myself, to Diane, to the friends and hobbies and dreams I'd set aside while I was busy being someone else's definition of a good wife. I'd like to think he's somewhere, somehow, knowing I'm okay, that we both are. Every morning, I sit in my sunroom with his coffee mug beside my laptop and I write. I tell stories about women who survive impossible things, who discover strength they didn't know they had, who choose themselves, finally, after years of choosing everyone else. And sometimes, when the light hits the mug just right, I can almost hear Robert's voice. That's my girl, he says. That's my Eleanor. And I smile and I keep writing. Take care of yourselves out there. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Protect your resources, your money, your time, your energy, your love from people who see them as commodities instead of gifts. Build relationships with people who give as much as they take, who celebrate your successes instead of calculating what those successes might mean for them, who love you for who you are, not for what you can provide. And remember, always remember, the people who truly love you won't make you pay for it. Not in money, not in guilt, not in the slow erosion of your self-worth until you've forgotten you ever had any worth at all. Love doesn't come with a price tag. If it does, it was never love at all. I'm Eleanor Chen. I'm 72 years old. I'm a retired English teacher, a published novelist, a widow, a survivor. I'm not a victim anymore. I'm not a failure. I'm not the woman who wasn't enough. I'm the woman who chose herself. Finally, after 67 years of choosing everyone else. And that, it turns out, is more than enough. It's everything.